The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
The following program is closed captioned for the thinking impaired.
By tomorrow, I will rule the world!
You think he's gone? He's not gone. That's the whole point. He's never gone.
Is this some radical new therapy?
You see?
Well, I must have not been paying attention when you were just talking to me. Do you think that you could repeat the question? And I listen more attentively. There must have been something in all of that nothing.
I didn't even see the video go. That's how out of touch I was at the beginning of this. All right, let's get this show on the road, shall we?
All right.
Usually we go through the whole song, but we got a special guest here today.
Yeah.
Hey, how you guys doing? My name's Tom Duggan here at the Paying Attention Podcast. Hi atop Two Guys Smoke Shop at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. We've got a really interesting show for you today. There is an election going on. You'd never know it. But there's an election going on in Massachusetts for state senate, state representative, for governor, for lieutenant governor, for treasurer, for state auditor. Make sure you vote for Diana DeZoglia for state auditor, even though she's a Democrat. And I started thinking, like, before the bash, as we were getting everything ready for the bash, it's an election year. We need to start having candidates in. And so I said, whatever candidates show up at the bash, they're going to get first shot on the podcast, because everything we do goes with everything else we do. And we always like to try and highlight the people that are helping us, that are coming to our events, or helping the Valley Patriot. So today we've got Chris Doughty is on the show. He's a candidate for governor, Republican candidate for governor, which, by the way, does not say on your website. It doesn't say Republican. So I went to your website. I said, well, and this is like a pet peeve of mine. So any candidate out there, especially like Estella Reyes and all of my candidates in Lawrence and Methuen, please, if you're going to set up a website, please put your party affiliation on your website. There are a lot of people who will not vote for a Democrat. There are a lot of people who won't vote for a Republican. The first thing that they look for when they go to someone's page is what party are they in, and most candidates, in fact, I'd say almost every candidate doesn't do that. So, just a little friendly advice for Chris before we start off. And I want to thank our sponsors too. When we pull up the list, McLennan Real Estate, Century 21 on Broadway in Methuen. We're going to have Matt come on again because I'm noticing some funny things going on with the real estate market. And I don't think he's been here for, at least 8 weeks, right? Usually he comes in every 4 weeks, but we had the bash screwed everything up. AFC Urgent Care in Methuen and North Andover. We love Lisa and her husband. They were both at the bash. They had a blast, and they gave us $1,000 for one of our scholarships, so we thank them for that. Yeah. Marsan and Son Construction. Ronnie Marsan also gave us $1,000 for one of our scholarships. I think it was the Greater Lawrence Tech Scholarship that he gave $1,000 to. EIS Investigation and Gun Training gave us $2,500 this year for the bash, and we appreciate that. They're also sponsoring the show. And my favorite deli. Now, have you been through Methuen at all during your campaign? Oh, yeah. Have you stopped at Borelli's Deli yet?
Not yet.
Okay, that's one of the go-to things you need to do. In fact, if you're going to do a meet and greet in Methuen, that's a good place to have it too, because it's centrally located on the east end. And everybody knows where Borelli's is. Like, you don't even have to say where. If you say, I'm having an event at Borelli's, no one's going to say, where's that? Everybody knows where Borelli's is. So we love Borelli's Deli. Best hot sausages. And if you like really, really hot sausages, you ask them for the Tom Duggan hot sausages, because he makes them special for me on Wednesdays. Go in and ask him for some of mine. He'll give them to you. Tomo and Shaken Seafood down the street. Best sushi around. Sullivan Insurance, Lazy River Products in Drake, and a free shout-out to Sebastian's House of Toys in Haverhill. They're coming on board starting next month, so we want to give them a free shout-out, give them a startup. So Chris Doughty is running for governor. He's a Republican candidate, and I know that all candidates hate it when I mention who they're running against, but I think it's only fair to the people at home to know who's running against who. He's running, at least right now, against Jeff Deal for the Republican nomination. Is there anybody else in that race?
No.
So it's just the two of you. So why don't you start off, Chris, by introducing yourself to the people at home. This is going to run for the next week. We'll run it continuously. Tell them who you are. Give them the flavor for, why you're running for office, and then we'll pick your brain about where you stand on some issues and what's going on with the campaign.
Right. Well, first, Tom, it's a real treat to be here with you, and I really enjoyed the bash the other night.
You. And thank you for staying.
Well, I left there with a feeling of giving back to the community and just the goodness that I felt among all those that were there. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for inviting me here on the podcast. Just a little bit about me. I arrived in Massachusetts in 1987. I went to Harvard Business School.
We won't hold that against you.
Okay, thank you. Lived downtown for a couple years and ended up settling in Rentham, which not far from the Foxborough Stadium where the Patriots play. Raised 6 children there. And
6 children?
6 children.
You should be governor just for that. 6 children?
Yeah, 6 children. And they all have left the house. Now we're empty nesters. We have 4 grandchildren.
That's got to be tough. I don't want to take time away from your political stuff, but that's got to be tough. You raise 6 kids, and that's got to be chaos for the 18 years that they're home, right? And then when they leave, that's got to be like culture shock.
Yeah, and they all went to public schools, and so you'll hear me talk a lot about public schools in your communities, and I spend a lot of time in public schools. I went to soccer games and basketball games in just about every school in New England, so I'm very close to that, to the education of our children. And I bought into a small manufacturing company in Boston in the early 90s, and we make metal parts. And over the course of 30 years, we grew it to a large business. We make auto parts, and in Rentham, we have a large factory, about 300 employees, and we make auto parts and truck parts, appliance parts.
So you must be doing good, because every mechanic I talked to in the last year says the biggest problem they have is getting auto parts because of all the shutdowns and everything, and the lag in the delivery services from stuff coming overseas. So being an American company that makes auto parts, you guys must be doing really well.
Well, we have supply chain problems too.
Oh, you do.
But we have good employees. So we have mechanics, CNC machinists, plumbers. We have electricians. So we have, I would say about half of our employees are Latino employees, and these are my friends and my colleagues. And we've been making good auto parts. I think some of the finest parts in America right here in Massachusetts.
Can I encourage you to open an auto parts place in Lawrence? There's plenty of room in Lawrence, and they could use the help.
Well, there's a lot I'd like to talk about in bringing businesses to these communities. Our state has focused so much on biotech and finance in Boston, but not near enough in these communities. And that's something I want to bring as governors, good jobs that have good benefits and long-term employment for the citizens outside of just Boston.
You're running against a guy that's already run statewide, right? Jeff Deal ran against Elizabeth Warren. I don't think anybody was ever going to beat Elizabeth Warren. I mean, let's face it, it's Massachusetts. It's a very liberal state. If you were to get past Jeff Deal, how do you beat Maura Healey? How do you beat someone like Maura Healey in a state like Massachusetts that, I mean, they just liberal right down the line. They go D straight down the ticket most of the time. Charlie Baker was kind of an aberration. Mitt Romney was kind of an aberration because they were kind of moderate. They weren't really right, far right wing. How do you plan, if you get past Jeff, how do you plan on facing the Democrats in a final and win?
Well, typically in our state, we do vote for Republican governors for the last 30 years. Weld, as you brought up, Weld and Romney and Baker. I think our state prefers to have one fiscally conservative person in the state house. And it's been important for our state. You can see how much spending and taxing would occur without that governor. So I really believe the citizens now, maybe more than ever, would like to have a Republican governor in the state house to be a block or a counterbalance to the spending and the taxes that they'll put through. Remember this, in 30 years, we've had one major tax increase, just one. It was on the sales tax, and that happened with a Democratic governor, Deval Patrick. We didn't go back to that, and I don't think we will. We've seen it over and over again in our state legislature that they'll spend and tax everyone for everything in our wallets. And so I really believe the citizens will still look for a Republican, fiscally conservative, but reasonable. I think people want a reasonable governor that can negotiate and work and solve problems with the legislature. And so I believe that'll stay the same.
You talked about education. That's one of the big things that we talk about a lot. I sat on a school committee in Lawrence for 3 years and was horrified at the way the sausage was made. Horrified.
Yeah.
And it hasn't gotten any better. I've got friends on school boards all over the Merrimack Valley, and they tell me it's actually worse now than it ever was. The politics in the classroom, the wokeness in the schools. We talk about it constantly on this show. If you become governor, do you have a plan to try and straighten out our public schools? To stop them from indoctrinating children with political views like global warming and abortion and transgender bathrooms and Donald Trump's a Nazi and all that stuff, and get them back to the basics of being able to do math in their head, being able to read and write English effectively enough to get a job.
Yeah, I do. I have 3 ideas that all could be implemented relatively quickly. One is a tip line or a call line, multilingual. So Spanish, Portuguese, English. You would call this number if your children are not being taught appropriate age-sensitive information in their class, or if they feel like they are not being well taught. Parents could call this phone number, and we would tabulate which districts are getting the most complaints from parents. And then we would call in the administrators from these towns and these districts and say, hey, we're getting a lot of complaints from your community and your district with regards to these teachings or in these classes or in these schools. And we would ask them to do what we call in the business world in manufacturing a root cause and corrective action. What's causing it? Why are the parents upset? And what are you going to do to fix it? And as we do in the business world, if they don't fix it quickly, we have more meetings. We'll say, okay, well, now we'll meet with you tomorrow till it's fixed. And if you're not getting it at our pace, the pace of business, I would say to them, I'll meet you every morning at 5 a.m. until the district issues are solved. The other thing is the state controls the curriculum. Right now we have broad-based stroked curriculum. If we need to, the state can come in and be more specific on the curriculum so that we can say, hey, these are the things that we want to teach. The last thing is this. A lot of teachers, there's 2 problems in education right now. One is that the teachers aren't earning enough money to still like the job. So day one, I'm going to go in and make sure that our teachers are being compensated adequately.
Oh, the unions are going to love you.
Well, it's true. Right now, our teachers and our police officers need affordable housing.
Right.
We're just not. Inflation's been 7%. Their wages have gone up 2%. So a lot are leaving the industry. The next one is this. I'm going to say to all the teachers and the parents, I want your kids and your teachers in the classroom. The teachers are spending too much time out of the classroom doing other things. Education occurs inside the classroom, and I want them to stay there. And so those are a few things we can do. But let me add one last thing. As a father of 6, I have seen my children have done much better when they've had extracurricular after-school activities, band, soccer, sewing, debate, anything that the kid or our children enjoy doing. I would really promote after-school curricular activities, and I would encourage it, and I would help pay for it, because I think the social networks, the friendships that kids develop, the skills, pursuing their own destiny are all so important for children.
And they learn how to function as a team, how to work as a team. And one of the things that I'm frustrated by, whether it's setting up a bash, whether it's running my newspaper, whether it's so hard to get people to work together as a team. There's always these little cliques and these little factions, and especially with the younger generation, I think it's much more deficient in that area. Get young kids coming all the time that want to volunteer with us to do stuff, and sometimes it's just hard. It's just hard.
Yeah. Well, we have 900,000 students right now. 25% of the students are of Latin origin. Okay, and these are my colleagues' children. They speak Spanish, or their parents speak Spanish, or their grandparents speak Spanish. As a governor, I would really focus on that. I likewise speak Spanish. I feel a real affinity to those that are Spanish and Portuguese speakers, and I think we would go right in on day one and say, let's make sure we have the best education. Now, we can borrow from Texas, New Mexico, other states that have a large Latin community to make sure they have the best schools possible.
You know that we're very interested in the homeless and addiction situation in Merrimack Valley.
Yeah.
In Massachusetts, we've lost more people to opioids than we lost to COVID. We've lost more people to addiction than we lost in Vietnam. None of our state reps, none of our state senators, God bless them, I love Charlie Baker, but Charlie Baker's not doing it. doesn't seem like any of our leaders are taking this seriously. It doesn't seem like let me revise that. Maybe some of them are taking it seriously, but they're not taking it seriously enough. Because this is the number one issue. It's the number one issue killing Americans. It's the number one issue killing the middle class. It's the number one issue killing our inner cities. As governor, what are you going to do to help those who are at the bottom who don't see any benefit whatsoever from all these $1 million programs that government spends to help the homeless or the poor?
Yeah. Well, the southern border, they estimate 90% of the fentanyl, which is a cheap drug, is coming in through the southern border. There's a group of governors that have joined together to try and fix it's a federal policy, but there's a lot of governors that are coming together to work on the southern border. I would join them. And I think the more governors that come together say we've got to fix the southern border because we have too many drugs that are flowing through, so the cost is cheap. And so that's one thing I would do right away. The second thing is this, is that the problem, if you look at it right now, the state has done as much as they can, but we've got to turn it over to the local communities.
Right.
Right now, we are basically defunding our local communities and using all the money in the state house. I would say, listen, over the course of time, I want to change that. I want to move more money to the local communities because they're the ones that are closest on the ground to address these problems, not down in Boston, on the state house. It needs to be a local solution.
They have no clue in Boston what it's really like. They have no clue. And we did a story, I think, about 2 months ago where Charlie Baker was going into Lowell to give them a grant to fix up a park, to clean up a park beautification. And 2 hours before he got there, the Lowell police went out and cleared all of the homeless tent encampments that were on that park, so that when the governor came, he wouldn't see it. And I was outraged. I'm like, he should see it. You should have left them exactly where they are and let him come to that park and see that you just gave X number of thousands of dollars to fix a park that homeless people are sleeping in and leaving dirty needles on. You're going to clean it, and 5 minutes later, they're going to be back, and it's going to be exactly what it is. You should have left them there. You should have left them there. And I don't think these guys really understand it at all. Have you been to any of the homeless encampments or talked to any of the homeless advocates about this issue?
First of all, let me just add to what you just said. What you just said resonated in my heart. It's so true that so often those that are in the political or the elite class, they don't see what's really happening. And I come from the working class. Those are the people I work with every single day. And so I've had colleagues that have lost children to addiction. And so I really understand what you're saying and what's happening in the communities. As far as me personally being in them, I've driven past them, I've walked through them, but I'm not as close as I'd like to be and as I hope to be as part of the campaign. Because I think when you're in it, and you get the sense and you get the feeling for it, then the ideas start percolating. Oh, here's how we can fix this, and here's what we need to do. I can tell you this, that my opponent, Maura Healey, she just announced a climate change. And part of her climate change is to put...
You could have just stopped right there, and everybody at home is just shaking their head.
Okay, she proposed about 3,000 windmills out in Nantucket Sound. That's about $11 billion. Do you know how much good we could do in your community and communities across the state if we said, instead of spending $11 billion on windmills, let's not spend all of that. Let's put some of it out in these communities to fix these problems. I was in Holyoke the other day. They do not have a shelter for the homeless. They live under a bridge in tents. That would never happen if I'm governor.
Well, I'm glad
that would never happen.
I'm so glad you said that because that goes right into my next question. So I live in North Andover. I was raised in Lawrence, but I moved to North Andover about 20 years ago. I've been in North Andover ever since. And the biggest frustration that the people in Lawrence have, and they're right, is that if you live in Andover and you've got $1 million home, you've lived there, you've paid taxes for the last 25 years, and your company goes under or your wife divorces you and takes you for everything and you end up homeless. Where in Andover can you go to get services after you've paid all those taxes? Nowhere. North Andover, nowhere. Methuen, nowhere. So where do all of those people go? They go to Lawrence. And if you're talking about the western part of the state, they go to Worcester, right? If you're talking the southern part of the state, they go to whatever the next inner city is. And so you've got all of these outsiders that flood into Lawrence. And I just use Lawrence as an example of a city. Lowell is the same way, right? And then the Lawrence people say, well, why are we going to spend all this time and money and effort to help the homeless when most of the homeless here aren't even from here? These aren't our people. They're not paying taxes. They're not Lawrence taxpayers. Why should we help them? And I understand that way of thinking because Methuen not doing their fair share. So I've always asked to break the question up, right? We have people who are hungry now, give them a sandwich. The people who are cold now, give them a blanket. Support the groups that do those things. While you're looking for a long-term solution of, hey, Methuen's got a senior center. Why don't they have a homeless center? Andover's got a senior center. Why don't they have a homeless center? And maybe it's only going to be open in Andover 2 or 3 times a year if there's a fire or something. But at least it's there. Like they've allocated resources. They've done something so that burden isn't all in one place in Lawrence. Because now in Lawrence, they're shoveling sand against the tide.
Yeah.
Because for every 10 people that get off the street, there's 20 more coming from somewhere else.
Well, there's the root cause of the problem. Then there's prevention. What you're talking about is prevention, which is, okay, now they're homeless. What do we do?
Right.
I would step back, because I come from the manufacturing world. I would step back and say, okay, we've got to figure out both. What do we do when you have the homeless? But what's causing the homelessness? We've got to get to the root cause, because what's causing the homelessness, if we don't fix that, it's just going to keep growing. We've seen it in Oregon, Washington, California. I was in California. Pacific Coast Highway 1 is tent city for 30 miles.
Yep.
So as our state, we've got to pivot, and we got to say, okay, we got to get to the underlying root cause so our homeless population doesn't keep growing.
Right.
So,
but what I don't want is I don't want government officials who only focus on the root cause. Right, that's my frustration with the Biden administration. They want to focus only on root causes, which means maybe 30 years from now we might find a solution. But in the meantime, look at all the damage being done.
Yeah.
I want it to be a 2-track. I want it to be, we've got people who are hungry now and on the street now. What do we do with them? While we're looking at the long term.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point, because the corrective action is long term, and frankly, a lot of things the governor deals with are long term. So you have to have both ideas. So, let me push you a little bit on this.
Sure.
The thing is that in the state, having the adequate resources and the professionals and the facilities, we probably can't do that in every town. I think as governor, we could identify, satellite areas and say, here's going to be the communities where we're going to have the resources, we're going to have the professionals, we'll have the facilities. And then the state should fund a large portion of that, particularly if it's pulling from surrounding communities. So it's not left to the host community. That's a traditional problem in the business world, where you have franchisees, but you have some that are handled by the corporate or by the state house in this example. So it might be hard for every community to handle the homeless, but certainly we could identify particular communities and say, we'll have one here that will attract, for these towns.
Is housing part of the answer? Because I'm always being told we need more low-income housing. And I can tell you that Lawrence does not need more low-income housing.
They have enough.
Low-income housing is killing Lawrence because they have a $280 million budget, and they're only taking $40 million in property taxes.
Yeah.
So putting more low-income housing into Lawrence isn't going to help, right? Really, and I hate to say this because everybody in my town, nobody wants it, right? It's not in my backyard kind of stuff. But North Andover could use it. Methuen could use it. Andover could use it. Drake could use, a homeless shelter or some kind of facility to help the homeless, to help the addicted. But it also seems like we need more middle-income housing. I think that seems to be more of the... And yet we're losing middle-income housing left and right in Massachusetts. It's I think, what was it, cut in half? I think it was cut in half over the last 10 years.
Yeah. Well, I have some specific ideas here. One is I'd like to copy from Maine. What Maine is doing is they're saying that if you have a dilapidated old house that's boarded up, not being used, the state will give you a grant to a developer or homeowner to fix it up, make it look nice, and make it livable. And so what we could do is convert housing stock that's currently not being used and makes a community look run down and poor with a little bit of money to a developer. They can turn that around and flip it and then bring it, either sell it or they can provide housing for low income. I think that's a good idea. The other thing is just making it easier to build in Massachusetts. We're making it harder and harder and harder. So my opponent, Maura Healey, she proposed that every new house now has to be a green and has to be solar. And what she's doing is she's actually reducing the housing stock because now it's more expensive and more difficult to build.
See, I would argue that that's the intent. I would argue that the Democrat Party's intent is to make it harder for us.
It's working because it keeps getting harder and harder to build housing stock. I think I drive through some communities and I see old mill buildings and I see old facilities that we should repurpose for housing as opposed to building a brand new, 4-story apartment building. I think we can do a lot of different things that are bringing back housing stock. I also believe communities should look good. Like, I like my factories to look good.
Right.
You walk through and you go, I am proud of this. It creates what they call pride of workmanship. People should be proud of their communities. You should walk down the street and you say, I really love the way this looks. I could see myself as governor coming up here and planting trees and planting bushes and cleaning things, because I think as governor, I want people to be proud of the areas they live in. No matter whether you're high income, middle income, or low income, I want you to live in an area that you like. Graffiti, I want to get rid of all of it. I'd put money to get rid of graffiti. Trash and trash pickup. I would say to the citizens in, let's say in Lawrence, I want to come up as your governor, and one weekend I want to clean it with you. All of you come out of your homes. Let's go clean your community. Let's make it look really nice. We'll take some pictures, and then we're going to go to the Tourism Bureau and say, hey, tell people to come to Lawrence. We've got some great rivers. We've got things for them to see. Let's make it a tourist
Lawrence
attraction.
is a great community, and nobody dumps on Lawrence more than I do because there's a lot of shenanigans that go on in Lawrence. But Lawrence is a tremendous community. It's a tremendous community, and there's so much there. And even like when we hold our bash, when people who aren't really familiar with us, they're just kind of figuring out who we are, and I say it's in Lawrence at the relief sit. Oh, it's in Lawrence. And I'm like, listen, this is the firefighters' relief inn. It's the safest lot in the city of Lawrence. Trust me, you're going to like it. Come.
Yeah.
Once you get people to come into Lawrence, despite what they think and despite what they've heard, they're very impressed, right? They're very impressed. But it's getting them there, and it's doing some of the things that you're talking about. Can I just make one pitch here?
Yeah.
So Karina Papalato is a friend of mine. She runs the Daybreak Homeless Shelter in Lawrence. It's the only homeless shelter in Lawrence, really. They're a wet shelter. Now, for those at home who don't know the difference, a dry shelter, they're one of 2 wet shelters in the state. A dry shelter is, all of the other ones are all dry shelters all throughout the state, which means if you show up and you're drunk, they won't let you in. If you show up and you're high, they won't let you in. So Daybreak started because there's a lot of people who are, let's face it, it's cold outside and they're out and they get high, and now it's 9 o'clock at night and they need a warm place to stay because it's snowing out or whatever. So they'll take them in. They're a wet shelter. They'll accept anybody no matter what condition you're in. But because they're a wet shelter, they don't qualify for 90% of the grants that are out there. So they're still struggling to get a new facility. They're still struggling to get more people to work there. They're still struggling to get financing to do some of the things that they do there with helping them, learning how to balance a checkbook for when they get back on their feet and stuff like that, get them into transitional housing. But they don't qualify because they're a wet shelter. And as governor, you could be the guy that say by executive order, no. We're going to open more wet shelters out there so we can get more of these people off the street no matter what condition they're in. And let's try to just get them off the street and get them into the system to try and get them on the path to success, on the path to getting transitional housing, to getting clean, to getting, not addicted anymore.
Yeah, I totally agree. A governor has an obligation to all citizens. So, and I keep saying this over and over again, the governor's job is a little bit different than other political offices that are really partisan, or this is a job where there's accountability and responsibility to every single citizen, regardless of party, regardless of addictions, regardless of many things. And I would take that responsibility on. I would say, I am responsible. My whole career has been one of being responsible and accountable for things, to fix things, not talk. I'm not a career politician. I'm not used to just talking about things. I'm used to fixing things. And so I would go to Daybreak. I would embrace her and say, I love what you're doing here. And then I would get in my car and I'd go to the Chamber of Commerce and I would say, what are you doing for jobs? Jobs. People need purpose. They need meaning. They need a job. What are we going to do to take these people that are struggling with addictions and give them meaning and purpose? Mm-hmm. And they could be simple jobs. They could run a press or, do things that give them purpose in life. And so
the defund the police movement, I think, has pretty much destroyed what was left of America after COVID. There's still a big movement in Massachusetts to defund police, to take away a lot of the authority that they have, a lot of the discretion that they have. Charlie Baker is the only thing that stood in the way of that. And I don't know what you think of Charlie Baker. I've known him for a long time. I have not liked a lot of the decisions that he's made. but at least I know that he's that speed bump. If you become governor, what are your plans?
Well, thank you. First of all, I would never defund the police. I will defend the police to my last breath.
God bless you.
So I am. I have three specific things that I want to do. One is, as I was talking about the teachers, is we need to make sure that they're compensated enough that they want to stay in the job. The job's becoming harder. We all recognize that. But we've got to make sure that the compensation tracks the difficulty. Otherwise, they leave to go be plumbers or electricians or to different trades. I've talked to just about every leader of every police organization in our state, and they are losing people at a very high rate, and people aren't applying for the jobs. I would fix that. Within the first 45 days of my administration, I would bring all the police leaders together in a meeting, and I would ask this question: how can I support you? What do you need? They know what they need. It's like someone coming to me and saying, in your business, what do you need? I already know what I need. The police already know what they need for support. I would say, what do you need? And let's start putting those things in place to support you in what you're doing and what you need to accomplish.
I can tell you one of their answers is going to be a parole board that doesn't let people out that shouldn't be out. I went to the funeral of a Woburn police officer about 10 years ago. Shot the night after Christmas. I don't know if you remember the case. And Dominic Sinelli was the guy that killed him, and he had been given 3 life sentences by a Dukakis-appointed judge. That's how violent this guy was, and the parole board let him out. And 2 days later, he killed a Woburn police officer. And thank God he was shot and he was killed that night too. But it focused everybody for about 3 minutes on the parole board and why is the parole board letting these people out. And when I talk to my police friends, they say their biggest frustration is they pick someone up or they investigate somebody. They put a lot of time, a lot of resources into it. They arrest him. They bring him into court the next day. He gets sentenced, and a year later they're dealing with the same guy again. And they're laughing at us. I mean, I've had cops tell me the criminals laugh at us. I go in and I lock them up, and they go, "That's okay. I'll be out in another 6 months anyway." And that's 100% on the governor.
Well, I think our big issue is we need to pivot our discussion to the victims. We talk so much about the police. We talk so much about politicians. We need to say, okay, we've talked enough about those things. Let us talk victims. What are we doing for victims? And so as a governor, I would walk in with the voice of victims. I've been a victim of crime. I felt it. I have witnessed other people be victims of crime. And it's heart-wrenching, and it changes your life. And so I will be the governor of the victims and say, let's talk more about what we can do for victims.
That's the headline, and that's what your newspaper ad should say. The governor for the victims.
Okay.
Right? Because I can tell you there's nobody that I know who hasn't been a victim of some kind of crime, whether it's their car being stolen, the house getting broken into, their girlfriend getting assaulted. And then we watch the national trend of letting people out of jail all over the country who have violent pasts, who have been arrested and put in jail for violence, and they get out and they do it again, and then they get let out again, and they get let out again because we have people in other areas of the country who don't really seem to give a damn about the victims at all.
Yeah. I think as governor, anything that has to do with public safety, I will look through the context of the victims. Mm-hmm. And I worry right now about many things, but another one I worry about is how backlogged we are in our judicial system. Now, I'm running for the executive branch, but I would go to the judicial system and I would ask them, how can I help you? Right now, we're about 3 years behind. So if you're a victim of a crime, it could be 3 years before it's dealt with. That's too long.
Right.
You've put your life on hold. You feel victimized. And so I would say to the executive branch, I want to help you. Right. As a guy that does supply chain bottlenecks and deals with time, I would say to them, here, let me help you come up with some lean systems. Let's figure out how, if you're a victim, you don't have to wait 3 to 4 years for your day in court. Let's bring it down.
I would also say that one of the things that I'm expecting from the next governor, no matter who it's going to be, is something, a frustration that people in Lawrence see every day. And that is someone goes to jail for 5 years for something. They get out. They get, they've served their sentence for whatever. They get paroled. They get put on a bus. They get sent to downtown Lawrence, and they get dropped off. And that's it. Like, okay, you're on your own. When I first heard that, I didn't believe it. I thought the guy was lying to me. And I actually talked to the sheriff, and the sheriff said, no, not really. That's not really how it is how they do it, because now I've seen it myself. And I'm thinking, if I'm that guy, like, forget the victims for 1 second. Yeah. If I'm that guy, I went out and I offended, I've turned my life around in prison, I want to kind of get back into the swing of things, And then they drop me off in the middle of Lawrence, in downtown Lawrence, with no direction whatsoever. Where am I going to live? Where am I going to get a job? I have no address, no place to take a shower. They end up reoffending. Like, what else can they do? They're going to steal something for food or for drugs or whatever. I'd like to see a transitional system so that when they get out of prison, they go into somewhere where we can start integrating them back into real life, where they've got their own apartment, they're paying electricity, they're they on the track to get a job.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Oh, no, it's so common sense, right? Like what you just said is like, that just makes such common sense.
Right.
That,
but it still doesn't get done. And no matter how many elected officials I have on the show, or I interview for the paper, or I bump into at Market Basket, they all go, yeah, that's a great idea. And then it never gets done. And like 2 weeks later, I'm watching a bus pull up and 5 people get off the bus. And like, they just, hey, do you know where like the nearest public phone is?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
yeah. Well, we elect our sheriffs. And so this really falls under the sheriffs. So, hopefully you have a good sheriff.
Well, maybe some money can be allocated for the sheriffs to be able to get some kind of transitional housing through the sheriff's department, so they're not going right back on the streets. Because there's a lot of good people who probably, if you put them in the right environment after they got out, would not reoffend.
Yeah.
But you put them in the wrong environment, and we all know through sociology and psychology how that works.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think you are right. There probably is room. We have a large state budget, $50 billion and growing, and so I think there's lots of opportunities.
Can we shrink that a little bit? Is there any way we could spend a little bit less? I'm okay for spending money on things we need to. We need welfare, but we don't need all the fraud. So I love Suzanne Bump. She's one of my favorite people in the world, because when she found all this fraud 5 or 6 years ago, she was all excited, even though the Democrat Party was kicking the crap out of her and saying, it's not true, there's no fraud in welfare. And she was like, no, don't you realize every dollar that we save from fraud, we can give to another person in need? Because she's a left-winger and wants to help the people in need. My thought is, if all that money was going to fraud, and now that we've exposed it through the auditor's office, first of all, people should go to jail, and they never do. But secondly, how about taking that money and just give it back to the taxpayers? Like, wouldn't that be great? Like, everybody gets a check at the end of the year. We took this amount of money. We thought we were going to need to spend it. We didn't. Here's some back. Wouldn't that be awesome?
Well, if you don't mind me making a pitch for myself.
No, please do.
There are 4 candidates. There are 3 career politicians, and then the businessman from Rentham. Me, my whole life has been getting the most from limited resources in the business world, and particularly manufacturing in Massachusetts. We don't have unlimited money. We have very limited money, but we have to do a lot with it. We have to buy capital, we have to pay people, we have to make a profit. I am very accustomed to the world of getting by with limited resources. Let's give some back to the taxpayers. Let's let them do some things. So I had been proposing a gas tax holiday. It wouldn't have cost us a lot. We have more than enough. We could have easily have done that one. That speaks to my background. It speaks to my interest. It's exactly what I'd like to do. Day one, I'm going to say to all the secretaries of all the departments that I want them to come up with a 3% cost reduction plan every year. I've done it my whole life. I have to sign contracts with 3% cost reductions. If you supply to GM, Ford, Chrysler, you're required to do that. I would say to our secretaries, okay, every year I want a 3% cost reduction. We'll take those funds and we're going to roll it back to the communities to fix the problems you and I are talking about.
Right.
I don't think I would come in with tax cuts right now, but I would come in and say, let's take that money, let's roll it out to the communities. They know where they need it, for homeless shelters, for sidewalks, for roads, schools. Right now, if you look at our state budget, we have basically for 12 years been defunding the local communities. Inflation's 7%. Right. You can only raise property taxes by 2.5%. The state's not giving you any more money. Right now, every community is being defunded.
Right.
Day one, I'm changing that. Day one, I'm saying we're going to get the communities caught up to inflation, and we're going to do it without raising taxes by just removing fraud, waste, leaning the things out so that our communities can feel thriving.
How are you going to work? We only have a few minutes left.
Okay.
Can we go just a little over? Is that okay? Do you have somewhere to be? Okay. And then I lost my question. Did you hear like the first half of the question?
I did. Where are you going to? I think something like that.
I lost it. Well, I guess we don't have to. I guess we don't have to extend the show. I lost the question. We have a couple of minutes left.
Well, we were talking about the budget. I was saying that we were defunding our communities, public safety, sidewalks, roads, et cetera, by keeping the money in the State House when there's been inflation.
Right.
So
you want to roll the money back to the communities, and I think that's an excellent campaign message, because I think most people realize that their local communities are getting screwed.
Yes.
Right? Even Methuen, which is a very moderate community, used to be very conservative. Now it's kind of moderate, but a really good community financially. And even they're saying, hey, look, we're getting killed here. We need more funding, and we can't raise property taxes anymore, like you said. So I think that's a great message. In the few minutes we have left, give your pitch. What is most important to you if you become governor? Why should people vote for you?
How about in English and in Spanish?
That's great. That's
That'd
fine.
be all right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of Spanish-speaking.
Yeah. I think there's several reasons. One is I'm going to fix the tax and spend culture in Massachusetts. Second, I'm going to fix the police problem. Third, I'm going to fix the education problem that we've been talking about. And I'm going to bring jobs, economy. I've been in it myself for 3 decades. I know why businesses are leaving. I've been tempted myself many times. I know what we need to do to fix it. The last one is a 2-party system. Single-party systems, we have a couple examples, California, Oregon, Washington. The states that we don't want is what we're faced with in November. So, in español, poquito. Yo estoy corriendo por gobernador de Massachusetts. Yo pienso y yo puedo ayudar a los hijos en las escuelas y los padres y madres que tienen hijos en las escuelas. Es tan importante por mí, por los hijos, tener una educación que es mejor de todo de Estados Unidos.
All right, as we wrap up, Randy Carter, who's from Clear Path for Veterans New England, former award winner at our Valley Patriot Bash every year, asks if you would promise to come to Clear Path for Veterans New England down in Devon and see what they do.
I promise.
Okay.
I would love to come see it.
All right. They're a great organization. They're our partner organization. In fact, we have a check to present to Randy if he can actually get back to me with a date so that we can do that for money that we raise at the Bash for them. They do tremendous things. They help homeless veterans get into housing. They help them get service dogs. They help them with groceries, any kind of health needs that they have. They're an amazing organization, and 100% of what you give goes directly to the veterans because they've got grants that help them with the overhead. So
yeah,
that'd be great. Chris Doughty, he is a candidate for governor here in Massachusetts. Would you come back on the show? Would you come back? Did you have fun?
Tom, those were such insightful questions. I feel it in my heart. Let's fix this state. It takes people like you and me and so many others to stand up and say, no, we can fix this. I'm a fix-it guy. We're going to fix this working together. It's never one person. It's an army of people. Mm-hmm. And so I join with you in what you're trying to accomplish.
Great. And if I could get Jeff Deal to agree, would you debate him on the show?
I would be delighted. I've been asking him.
Because he loves us. So I'm pretty sure he wouldn't say no to me. Maybe he will, but I don't think he will.
I've been asking and asking. So,
but I mean, you guys are going to get tough questions, even though I'm a conservative. I am going to end up voting for one of you, right?
Please.
All right, great. Chrissy, why don't we roll that up? I appreciate you coming. Who's your friend here? Who's
Danny Sander? He's working
Dan
with
Sander,
me.
I appreciate coming up with you, and I appreciate the table of people that you brought to the bash too. I noticed that some politicians came, they worked their room and they left. You came, bought a table, stayed till the very end. And that shows a lot for your commitment to local communities, and I appreciate that.
Well, I loved the people I met. It was wonderful. I left a better man.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank Matt McLennan and Sam and Janet over at McLennan Real Estate, Century 21 on Broadway in Methuen, AFC Urgent Care in Methuen and North Andover, Marsan and Son Construction, our friend Ronnie Marsan. This is the time to get your construction done because the weather's starting to get nice. EIS, investigation, and gun training. They also provide security. If you need security, let me know. We got a bunch of good guys can help you out. What else do we have? Tomo and Shaken Seafood, Clear Path for Veterans New England, Lazy River Products in Drake It, great cannabis place in Drake It. I'll be going there tomorrow to do a tour, to write a story. And a free shout-out to Sebastian's House of Toys in Haverhill, who's coming on board next year. Melvin Taylor, I think you just said we got to go home, so go home already.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.